All right, we're on video number 6 in the Erector White Truck build, and this is going to be putting together the front end and hooking up the steering column and getting the firewall in place and possibly mounting the seat. I'm going to try to move along a little quicker here, shorten the videos up a little bit, not talk so much. So for the front end, we need 2 of the steering knuckles. We need the tie rod, and then we're going to need a drag link, and then of course the steering column and the steering wheel. So I'm going to mount the parts together for the tie rod and the steering knuckles right here, and I've got a 1/2 inch 832, and I'm going to put 2 nuts on here. So the first one I'm going to leave just a little bit loose. Now this has to have play in it, and if we don't leave it a little loose, or if we don't put a second nut on, I guess I should say, it will continually fall apart. So, okay, that's too tight. That feels better. So this flat wrench that I'm using is from a I think a little bit later 1930s, 1940s Erector set. And then the other wrenches I'm using, these are Craftsman. They're open on both ends, and they're from, I believe, a set for working on ignitions on an automobile. But by putting these 2 nuts on here and tightening together, it'll work like a lock nut, and they won't loosen up, or they shouldn't loosen up anyway. And you could definitely accomplish this same thing by using, go get an 832 nylock nut and use an actual lock nut on it. So I've got this flipped upside down, and before I put the knuckles and the tie rod in place, I do want to show you, I'll point to it here. This bracket is for the steering column to go through. And in the steering column, there's a small hole, and that hole has to go above the bracket. I guess here below the bracket, I've got it upside down, and we put a cotter pin in there. So that will keep that steering column from dropping past the bracket. Now, I have found a couple of these sets where the hood looks like it was probably never mounted, but this tab, when it came from the factory, it was not bent in this upward position. So one of the sets I have, and I'll look for it and see if I can find it to show in another video, it actually has a little slip of paper in there, and it explains how to bend this bracket into the right position. So the bracket did not come the way it is right now. All right, I'm going to slide this through, and the way we want this is on the tie rod, this little metal pin here, you want that facing to the ground. The bend in that wants to be facing down to the ground. And then these knuckles get mounted with one of the 1 3/8 bolts on each side. And these, it's okay to tighten them up nice and snug because they left enough spacing in the casting so that you don't have to worry about tightening it up and making it too tight. Now, with this cast metal, I'm really skeptical about how strong it actually is. So I don't know that I would get too crazy with how tight you make the bolt or the nut here, but it will be fine just with the nut on there. That doesn't need a second lock nut in place. Now for the steering column, it's easier if we start out outside of the truck here, and I'm going to mount one end of the drag link onto the steering column. And I'm going to do the same thing here. So here I'm using a 3/8 bolt, and I'm going to go ahead and put 2 nuts on here again. And I want it loose, but I don't want it super sloppy with play. So I'm going to make sure that I'll test it here after I tighten this up. I think that's just a little bit tight. There's just a little catch in it, and these steerings I've noticed they're pretty finicky. So once we get everything together, we want it to function. So I'm gonna just back it off a little bit. I think that's better. All right, so now I'm going to scoot the steering column through, replace it through from the bottom here, and I want the angle or the bend here again to be facing down toward the ground. And I'm going to move this down so that I can get the cotter pin in the hole. Now this is a cotter pin that was in the set that it actually looks a little bit different than the other ones. So I think this one was maybe added, and it didn't look like it had been bent. So I figured since it was different and it hadn't been bent, I would use it there, and that would work out a little better. All right, so checking my alignment and my spacing here, I want to flip that drag link to the bottom of the steering column. And I'm also going to flip with using that longer 832 bolt in there, I'm going to flip this over and run it through from the bottom. And you'll see why I put it in from the outside. It was, it's definitely easier to do that. I just accidentally flipped it over when I mounted it. That's better. And I misplaced my screw here. So I want to use a 3/8 screw in here. And I'm going to go the same thing. Double up the nuts. I did start putting the nuts that aren't screwing on in a little pile, so I'm getting a little bit of binding here. So what I'm going to do, when that happens, I've found I probably have, looks like this nut over here, a little too tight still. So when I tested this, I just had the bolts through and a nut, just one nut on real loose, so I wasn't getting any issues with the binding. That feels pretty good. So now I'm going to flip this over. Yeah, I think with the top of the steering column mounted and the steering wheel mounted on there, that's going to be good. All right, so got the firewall, and I did talk about the way the instructions show to mount this, where you put a flat strip going across and then you have two strips going up at an angle. The way I have this set up with no gap between the two base plates, that won't work. The holes will not line up. I tried all different pieces and try to get different angles. The steering column has to be right about at the top under these two holes. And so it's not going to line up. So what I did is I took one of the 5-hole flat pieces from a different set, and I opened a spot up so that the steering column will go through. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to mount this right here. I'm going to use the bottom hole and then the center of that slot. And if you eyeball it, it's off a tiny bit, but it's not enough that it won't line up. So before you put the nuts on, put the bottom screw in and then start the top screw. And then I'm going to flip this over and I'll put the nuts on. And this just one nut on each bolt. Hopefully it's not bothering anyone. I'm calling these bolts, and I guess technically they're a machine screw, but getting a lot of nuts back here, so it won't help me to tighten the wrong one. All right. So that's the way that'll look. And I slide that over the steering column. And that's the way the finished dashboard will look. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bolt these two floor sections together. Now here, these bolts are going through at a little bit of an angle, so you have to use your screwdriver. And because of that angle, you're basically threading them through. Okay, I'm going to flip this over. There's enough pressure on them. I don't have to worry about them falling out. All right, now, again with these, you don't want to over tighten these two, because it will bend and distort. It'll pull your firewall away. So right now, with that screwed down, I'm tied up against the back of the hood, and I like the way that looks. And then if I straighten the steering knuckles out, I'm going to go to the side here. All right, so let me turn this. Hopefully you can see that. So that's moving really nice, and I've got a nice range from side to side. I think I've got full movement side to side, so I'm really happy with that. Now for mounting the seat, I'm going to go ahead and mount the seat with the solid back for now. I've still got the other one, and I haven't for sure decided which one I'll use when I'm all completely done. But the directions show using one of these 5-hole strips that are bent, and these come this way in the set. Okay, so they've got that bend in them, and it has the screw going through the very first hole in the 5-hole base plate. But I'm going to use the second one, and I'm actually going to mount it so that the flat is up like this, and I'm going to mount that flat against the back of this base plate. So I just need to go to the second hole. All right, so those are just on there as the L shape, and then they go up against the base plate. So I'll get a screw put through on the inside on each one of these. I'll put them through from the inside to the back, and then I'll have to get up inside here. I'll use that long Erector wrench for that. You could also use a pair of needle nose pliers to hold the nut, but I'll get that done, and then it's time to start thinking about the bed in the back and the wrecker boom that I'll build to go inside of the bed. So that'll start the next step, getting the bed mounted and starting to build the wrecker. So hopefully you're enjoying watching this. I'm enjoying building this. I'm having a lot of fun with it, and I'm hoping some people that maybe are out of the Erector hobby or haven't thought about it will see these videos and learn stuff about it. And it's a lot of fun. It's cool for kids with the engineering. I have several grandkids, and I know that they really enjoy these things. And I have been working on putting sets together for them that as they get a little older, the oldest one right now is almost 5, that they'll be able to have their own set and be able to build their own stuff. So again, thanks for watching.